Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily. Today discussing the Carolina Panthers firing offensive coordinator Joe Brady. A couple days late on this, Sam, but still worth the discussion because Joe Brady was fired on his bye. He was fired on his off day, Sam. And it's a curious move by the Carolina Panthers because Joe Brady's like the hot name around the NFL as far as offensive coordinators go. At least he was just 13 weeks ago coming into the season. So what happened in Carolina? By the way, Jeff Nixon's going to take over the play calling duties, but this is more about Brady and how you go from hot name that could be getting a head coaching job to fired on your bye week.
Yeah, and it's something that we come back to because it's one of those sort of reports where everybody keeps looking at it and going, did that really happen? Like, where did this come from? Like, as you say, it wasn't long ago that Joe Brady was seen as, the guy that was responsible for getting great numbers out of Teddy Bridgewater last year, even if it wasn't great play, and then had fixed Sam Darnold after 3 weeks of the season. All of a sudden, the whole thing unspools, and Brady goes from, well, he's going to be a head coaching candidate next year to the guy, the scapegoat in Carolina for getting booted out the door. And look, the simple answer is the way it happens is the offense is terrible. Like at some point, there's going to be somebody left carrying the can, and it's not going to be Matt Rule because, he's in charge. He's the guy that's calling the shots. So Joe Brady was the sacrificial lamb. But the numbers that got him dumped were Carolina right now is 31st in the NFL in EPA per play on offense. They're 30th in yards per play. The Sam Darnold thing unraveled quickly, and he's playing as badly as he ever has in the New York Jets this year. So all of that is kind of within Joe Brady's remit. And I'm not saying it's all his fault, but that's how a guy goes from, the golden child to being kicked out of the door.
So the other reason why he's the golden child, too, is what he did at LSU with Joe Burrow. And that's why he got this gig in the first place. Joe Burrow went from pretty good SEC quarterback to one of the best quarterback seasons of all time in 2019 and then first overall pick. And I think that's one of the difficult things in this whole discussion, Sam. Like when you're looking for the next great offensive mind, offensive coordinator, how do you separate the play caller, the guy who develops the quarterback from the quarterback himself? Because this is why Joe Brady's the hot name, right? He was the guy who supposedly got this great season out of Joe Burrow, but now as you get more information, does he lose a little luster because he had Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, right? Two of the most uncoverable receivers in the NFL right now, Terrace Marshall as well. But that's what they had at LSU. That's what kind of got Joe Brady on the map. And then to your point, last year, got a decent year out of Teddy Bridgewater. This was supposed to be the year that they got another productive season out of a lesser quarterback in Sam Darnold. But Darnold has a 62.6 PFF grade. That is perfectly in line with his 3 previous seasons with the Jets. So it's just an interesting discussion how you find that next great offensive mind and how, poor quarterback play, poor offensive line play in Carolina could maybe thwart that a little bit.
Yeah, it's always very difficult to identify how much specific coordinators or specific play callers actually move the needle and are sort of responsible for the improved play or just the play period of the people around them. And it's why sometimes you get these guys where everybody thinks that they should be the next great head coaching candidate. Their offense is great or everything's going well and they're the hot name. And year after year, they don't get the job. And maybe NFL teams are wrong for that, but maybe they're right. Maybe something happens in the interviews where they know more than you do in terms of how much that guy is responsible for what's going on. And that's why those guys don't get hired. And with the Joe Brady thing, yeah, look, his calling card was that offense in LSU, where I think he was only a co-offensive coordinator. Am I remembering that right?
That's right, and I cannot remember offhand who he had, but
right. But so you've already got this division of responsibilities. Then you've got the fact that he's dealing with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, all of whom we've subsequently discovered are amazing in the NFL, let alone in college in the SEC. And Jefferson in particular, like you might have been underusing that guy. You kind of moved him and just had him as a slot receiver where he was really good and did great work. All of a sudden, he's arguably the best receiver in the NFL outside of Devontae Adams right now. So, like, did you actually maximize what he could do for you, or did you actually hinder the impact that he could make? But either way, you're now looking at this in new light saying, well, these guys all appear to have been incredible players anyway. did you actually do that much, or were you just the beneficiary of being surrounded by some great players?
I want to get into some more of that discussion and some of the things that Matt Rule said. But first, football fans, I'm sure we all love an action-packed, high-scoring NFL game, but with the latest no-brainer from DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. You'll be a winner with once a single point is scored. New customers who bet just $1 on any team to score can win $100 in free bets. It's that simple. If Sportsbook isn't yet available in your state, you can still get in on the NFL action. Everyone can play for huge cash prizes all season long with DraftKings daily fantasy sports contests, and DraftKings is giving all new customers a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes with their first deposit. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code PFF. Bet $1 on any team to score and win $100 in free bets. If they score, you score with promo code PFF this week at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 or older. New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. $1 wager required. One per customer. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Matt Rule said, paraphrasing here, something along the lines of he went out of his comfort zone in hiring Joe Brady because it was someone he did not have previous experience working with. And I think that's just an interesting take because we talk a lot about NFL nepotism and why certain guys always get a job and all that stuff, or why people hire only people that they know or whatever it might be. But there's kind of something to that as well, right? It is a difficult situation to hire people you're not familiar with. You don't know what you're going to get. Philosophy is a huge thing, being on the same page. And it seems like that was one of the key issues, Matt Rule, looking back, maybe. The other part, he wanted to run the ball more. He was talking a lot about run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. And, clearly there was a disconnect there with Joe Brady's play calling and what Matt Rule was expecting.
Yeah, and at the very minimum, not having that connection makes it easier to sever contact when something like this does happen, right? So if Matt Rule had gone with a guy that he'd worked with before and that he knew, and even if there were differences and issues like this, would he have been so ready to throw somebody else under the bus? A guy that he had got previous experience with. So I think that's probably some of it. The run game stuff is interesting though, because one thing you can do in terms of quantifying play callers is start looking at things like how often do they run the ball in certain situations? What's their pass philosophy? Do they target deeper down the field? All these kinds of things. And in those kinds of statistics or areas, Joe Brady does look sort of quite progressive and, quote unquote smart, the way that analytics and numbers is suggesting you should play the game. And yet Rule is apparently pushing back and saying, no, we need to run the ball more. We need, bringing more of a kind of old school mentality to the table. So that is an interesting aspect of it, that's an area where Brady does appear to be sort of backed up by the data and by numbers, and yet that appears to be one of the reasons that he's essentially been kicked to the curb.
The one thing I'll say there, though, he might be backed up by the data in a vacuum, but I do think when you're working behind just a horrendous pass-blocking offensive line, at some point the personnel might dictate, let's work the other way. And look, it's not a good offensive line, run blocking or pass blocking, but if you're Joe Brady, you're kind of in a bind, too, just from a play calling standpoint. What about just going forward? Like, what happens to Joe Brady? Does he have to get another offensive coordinator job? Like, the thing is, I don't know what we know about Joe Brady. We can only see what you said, the play calling. How often do they pass and run and do all this stuff? We're not in the interview process. We don't really know. So we should want to have a strong take on this. But it seems to me like Joe Brady, just because of this firing or because of this season, might have to get another offensive coordinator job, continue to prove himself before he gets into the head coaching, a potential head coaching gig.
Yeah, I think any talk of him as a head coach was kind of contingent on him making Darnold in particular look better than he did with the Jets. Maybe, didn't have to fix him, didn't have to have Darnold looking incredible, but just sort of show a notable, demonstrable jump in Sam Darnold's either performance or his numbers. Even if Darnold hadn't actually played that much better, if he was getting really good production out of him, I think he would have had a case. That didn't happen. So, yeah, I think he is a coordinator somewhere. The one last point to make, by the way, is that Teddy Bridgewater, kind of on his way out the door last year, I don't want to say took shots, but sort of said that, look, Joe Brady might have to do a few things a little bit differently if he's going to kind of keep going at this level, and was sort of talking a little bit about practice and those kinds of things. Again, who knows? We're none of us are there, but Bridgewater was, and sure, you could say it's sort of sour grapes because he didn't really work out there. On the other hand, Bridgewater's been around the block quite a lot in the NFL and knows, a lot about the game at this level. And there's probably something to that. Joe Brady is a young coordinator, fairly new at his game. Maybe there are some things he does from a practice standpoint that aren't necessarily the best way of doing it. But anyway, I think there are enough things in terms of those data points and enough good on his resume to get him an offensive coordinator job somewhere. He's also got both college and the NFL open to him in terms of experience. So I don't think he'll struggle for jobs, but I think he needs to go somewhere. If he's staying in the NFL, one of these teams that is open to that kind of progressive, pass happy style of offense. And the one that would be really interesting to me actually is Cincinnati, where you would team back up with Joe Burrow. Like, I know Zach Taylor is calling the plays there and the guy that sort of runs the team, but maybe he'd be happy splitting that up and giving Joe Brady that kind of responsibility.
I like it. That could be a really good fit. I think bottom line, though, Brandon Staley's off to a good start. We've seen Sean McVay have success. Maybe we need to pump the brakes a little bit on like the 1 year success, 1 year wonder guys, becoming the next head coaching candidate. Just get a little bit more data, a little bit more information. Joe Brady out in Carolina. We'll see where he lands. The